Hindi po kaya dahil meron na po, senior na po kasi ako.
He's among millions the government's wooing to get an additional dose as public interest in booster shots drop. As of Sunday, only 26% of eligible vaccinees got boosted. Over 240 million COVID-19 vaccines are in stock. Presidential Advisor for Entrepreneurship Joey considers a surge of breakthrough infections could hit the now recovering economy.
If we really want people to take the booster, then we will have to follow what we did with the vaccination card, no? Or else people will not really take it. No? They will take their time at masasayang rin.
Kasalukuyan tayong nagre-review kung pwede nang i-include ang booster or third dose as part of primary series. In the next 2 to 3 weeks, tingnan natin kung ano ang pwede pa nating maisagawa para ma-convince yung ating mga mamamayan magkaroon ng booster doses.
On Friday, health spokesperson Maria Rosario Vergeres says a booster shot won't be required yet to be considered fully vaccinated. But what does the public think about it?
Hindi dapat gawing mandatory siya. Sapat na siguro yung meron kang first at second dose.
Okay na po yung vaccination card. Masyado na pong strict yung implementation kung isasama pa po natin yung booster.
Mas maganda nga na na mandatory siya just to make sure na yung vaccine sa katawan mo ay may effect ba.
Kailangan din lahat i-require. Kasi para patas tayo.
The Vaccination Operations Center has asked the FDA to extend vaccines' shelf life. They're also sending stocks to bakuna centers like hospitals. And still on the table, the Philippines donating vaccines to other countries. Caroline Bongkin, CNN Philippines.
The government plans to put an expiration date on COVID-19 vaccination cards. The Interior Government says this is to encourage more people to get their booster shots.
Isa po yan sa pinag-uusapan namin ngayon, yung again, inuulit ko yung mga strategiya on the policy side para yung tao ma-force na magpabakuna or magpa-boosters. So isa dyan, nabanggit ko na kanina, redefinition ng fully vaccinated. At pangalawa, ito nga posibilidad na kung hindi ka pa nakakapag-booster, after 6 months, automatic yung inyong vax card, expired na.
Meantime, presidential candidate Leody de Guzman lists suggestions to make sure millions of COVID-19 vaccines will not expire. Among them, identify areas with the lowest vaccination rate and the most number of vulnerable sector, boost funds for cold chain facilities and other logistical needs, ramp up house-to-house and all-day vax drives, and address vaccine hesitancy at the barangay level. The Health Department is in talks with the World Health Organization about the Omicron XE, a hybrid of the BA1 and BA2 subvariants. This comes after Thailand recorded its first case of the mutant hybrid. In a statement, the DOH says it is monitoring whether WHO would categorize it as an Omicron subvariant or a new variant. The United Kingdom's Health Security Agency referred to Omicron XE as the recombinant of the Omicron subvariants BA1 and BA2. It reported that as of mid-March, the hybrid strain has a growth rate 9.8% above that of BA2, which is the dominant Omicron subvariant in the Philippines. The DOH says it is also working with the Philippine Genome Center to monitor COVID-19 case trends and conduct genomic surveillance activities. It assures safety measures are in place to prevent the entry of the new and existing variants. Government data shows over 1.7 million Filipinos are working overseas, and their remittances are helping fuel economic recovery. The newly created Migrant Workers Department aims to make things easier for OFWs to access their documents and ask help from the government. As Tristan Nodal reports, the department secretary is also urging relevant agencies to abide by the law.
After enduring a 9-hour trip from Ilocos Province, OFW Frenny Tacla went straight to the Philippine Overseas Employment Administration building to process her papers for Israel. This is her third time to work abroad, but she admits it's a challenge going from one agency to another. She is hopeful the newly created Department of Migrant Workers can solve that.
Nakakalito din lalo na yung mga nasa malalayo, pupunta pa kung saan pagod kami. Gaya ko, galing pa akong Ilocos, wala pa akong tulog, diretso ako dito. Pero kung iisa na lang ang pupuntahan mo, diretso na lang sa kaysa sa iba-ibang kwan.
She says it would be more convenient if they can process documents in their home provinces.
Mas maganda yun kaysa pupunta ka pa ng Manila.
Department of Migrant Workers Chief Abdullah Mamao vows speedy transactions for OFW documents under the new department. President Duterte signed Republic Act 11641, or the law creating the Department of Migrant Workers, in December 2021. Government agencies dealing with OFW concerns will be under the new department. The DMW has a 2-year transition phase before it becomes fully operational in 2023.
After the preparation and approval of the IRR, we will be preparing the staffing pattern. That will be based on the implementing rules and regulations. Then from the approval of the staffing pattern, we will be preparing the proposed budget for the year 2023.
But interpretations of the law vary, with the Labor Department insisting that attached agencies under DOLE will remain under its jurisdiction until DMW becomes fully operational. Mamao counters this.
If the Department of Labor is claiming that the ILAB, the Polo offices, the Repatriation Center in the OWA, and that of the Maritime Polytechnic Institute are still part of the Department of Labor, that is their own choice. And we are here dealing with the law. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm sticking with the law. I will decide, I will act, and I will do anything that has something to do with the law.
The migrant workers chief also vows to expand the labor market for Filipinos by possibly lifting restrictions in Libya and Iraq. He will also study the prevailing deployment ban of household workers to Saudi Arabia. Tristan Odalo, CNN Philippines.
CNN Philippines is reaching out to Labor Secretary Silvestre Bello to clarify his position on the Migrant Workers Department. Coming up on Newsnight, the Lacson-Soto tandem drops another senatorial candidate from its slate for openly endorsing rival Bongbong Marcos. And Film artists take the spotlight in this year's Grammy Awards. We walk you through the biggest night in music here on CNN Philippines. Welcome back to Newsnight, where we go above and beyond the headlines. The Commission on Elections is seeing a potential shift in voting patterns in this year's elections. The agency says young voters can pave the way for reforms. And as David Santos reports, that includes a generation of new political leaders.
Youth leaders in Metro Manila gathering in Marikina on Monday for a forum on responsible voting. Among those present, Kael Mata of Pasig.
Bilang basta yung pagboto, kundi dapat nauunawaan namin yung proseso.
Aside from taking part in a mock election, participants were also briefed on how the voting counting machines work, since many of them will also be first-time voters. Data shows the 2022 elections could be a national record with close to 66 million eligible voters. Of this number, 37 million are within the 18 to 41 age range, meaning, according to COMELEC, almost 6 in every 10 are considered young voters. In the 2019 elections, a third of the ballots cast were from young voters, which was significantly high for COMELEC. That number is expected to go up this year despite the pandemic.
Active sila ng registration, so therefore we believe that it is very possible, very likely in fact, that they will also be very active in the elections themselves.
The presence of young people in massive campaign rallies as well as their political engagements on social media could be a preview of the influx of young voters for this election cycle.
Makikita mo na instead of having people voting the way their elders voted, you have potentially a generation that votes the way they want to vote because they want to vote that way. And that will result in, I think, the possibility of a new generation of political leaders as well.
The change in voters' profile, officials hope, could also lead to a shift in voting behavior. This includes doing away with illegal election activities such as vote buying, which seem to have become the norm in many areas.
Nasa kabataan yung ating pag-asa. Kung mababago natin yung pananaw nila when they become adults, they will also resist vote buying.
The Interior Department will hold similar forums nationwide in the run-up to next month's elections. David Santos, CNN Philippines.
Are we seeing another group switching support for presidential candidates 35 days before the Filipino votes? A major volunteer network supporting Isko Moreno clarifies it has yet to decide whether it will follow the decision of its Cebu chapter to endorse Leni Robredo. Ikaw Muna Pilipinas Cebu Chairman Nick Malazarte believes Robredo has better chances of beating Bongbong Marcos. IM Pilipinas Secretary General Elmer Arganio says they respect the choice of their Cebu chapter. He adds their decision will be known in the coming days.
Sinasabi nila, malakas din ang agos ng suporta kay Leni doon, despite na may gumagalaw kami doon at pumunta na rin si Yorme, hindi pa rin siya umaakyat na maging serious contender ni Marcos Jr., at least in the province of Cebu.
The political party of Bongbong Marcos taking steps to, quote, safeguard his votes in the May 9 polls. Partido Federal ng Pilipinas General Counsel George Briones says the group will deploy nearly 16,900 volunteers as poll watchers in Central Visayas. He says this is to prevent any attempt to rig election results. While Ping Lacson and running mate Tito Soto have dropped fellow Senator Mig Zubiri from their slate after he openly endorsed the tandem of Marcos and Sara Duterte. Lacson says they have no hard feelings towards Zubiri for his personal decision.
No, alam naman nila yon kung ano yung consequence. Kung ayaw nila sa amin, iba yung gustong dalhin. Parang awkward naman ang dalhin pa rin namin sila, hindi ba? So, it's a personal choice, no hard feelings. Pero yun ang sinabi, maliwanag naman yun when we talk to him, na pwede sila ma-endorse ng iba, ma-adapt ng iba. But once they endorse another team, another tandem, then so be it, and that's it.
Lacson also says he will inhibit from the Senate investigation into the unpaid estate tax of the Marcos family. Senator Coco Pimentel says the probe may happen within the week. Now, over the weekend, 9 of 10 presidential candidates gathered on one stage again to share their insights about key issues affecting the lives of millions of Filipinos. Paulo Barcelon breaks down their plans to make sure the supply of basic needs is enough in this report.
The final segment of the second Pilipinas Debates 2022 focused on issues that directly impact Filipinos' daily lives: energy, food, and water. Vice President Leni Robredo, Labor Leader Leody de Guzman, and former Malacanang spokesperson Ernesto Abella were grouped together. Their talk dwelled on the use of renewable energy. All three candidates want cleaner energy sources in the mix, for they believe it will help address the country's power and environmental woes.
Pero ang problema, walang political will yung ating gobyerno para ipatupad ito. Kasi ang mas gusto ng ating pamahalaan na nagpalit-palit ay pagkakitaan talaga itong fossil fuel, lalo na yung coal.
So ang dapat unang gawin, asikasuhin na yung mga service contracts, asikasuhin na yung mga sources ng renewables. Alam na natin na papunta na tayo doon, so dapat mag-invest na tayo.
To develop, for example, solar, wind, turbine, and also biomass. No? Unahin po natin to, and we're open to consideration about nuclear, pero right now kasi there are risks involved.
Next up were Manila Mayor Isko Moreno Domagoso, former Defense Chief Norberto Gonzales, and Senator Panfilo Lacson. The three government officials were asked on how they plan to provide Filipinos access to clean and potable water for households and agriculture. Moreno says he wants water companies and cooperatives to invest in protecting and rehabilitating watersheds. Gonzales wanted repairs in the water system, while Lacson pushes for more investments in research and development.
Hindi pwedeng yung nahihirati na sila sa kita, ayaw na nila mag-reinvest. We must ask them. Anyway, if they are not, maybe I'll review their contracts.
Yan po ay milyon-milyong galon ang itinatapon kung hindi inaayos. Ewan ko po kung nire-repair ulit.
Bakit hindi natin suportahan? Kasi maraming teknolohiya. Yung catch basin, halimbawa, sagana tayo sa ulan. 50% of our cities and municipalities nasa coastal areas. Hindi pa tayo kinukulang sa tubig. Sagana tayo sa ulan, pero natatapon.
On concerns about food and nutrition, Senator Manny Pacquiao, Dr. Jose Montemayor, and Faisal Mangundato were asked how they will ensure the nutrition of Filipinos. One wanted a change in the form of government. The other two wanted to focus on helping the agriculture sector.
Kailangan po magkaroon tayo ng bagong sistema na ito ang federalismo doon sa bayanihan, constitution.
Tanggalin na natin yung rice tarification, no? Nagpapahirap sa ating mga magsasaka.
Pag nag-import tayo, mahirapan at pinapatay natin ang pangkabuhayan ng mga farmers natin. Hindi lamang farmers, pati yung mga fisher folks natin.
Paulo Barcelon, CNN Philippines.
Presidential hopefuls pushing for political reforms to address another nagging problem in government, corruption. CNN Arcangel reports at least two of them agree on a law punishing turncoats, while one candidate draws criticism from his opponents for defending political dynasties.
Manila Mayor Isko Moreno, Leody de Guzman, Norberto Gonzales, and Faisal Mangundato all blame a weak system for the rampant corruption in government. Moreno says his proposed solution is already being implemented in Manila.
To solve it is to limit human discretion in government transaction by adapting to technology. Yun yung specific kong gagawin, katulad ng ginawa namin sa Maynila.
For Vice President Leni Robredo, Senator Manny Pacquiao, and Joey Montemayor, corruption is caused by problems in the system and the people. If elected president, Robredo vows to sign an executive order mandating a full disclosure policy in government offices, while Pacquiao assures corrupt officials will go to jail under his watch. Senator Panfilo Lacson says leadership by example is key to weeding out corruption. He's also in favor of banning political dynasties, but admits it will be difficult to pass an enabling law since Congress is dominated by political families. Pacquiao drew criticism from Montemayor and Mangundato for saying it will be unfair to limit the number of family members holding public office.
Unfair naman doon sa mga pamilya na nagserbisyo ng tapat, malaki ang nagawang pagbabago sa kanilang lugar at nagtumutulong sa taong bayan. Hindi naman lahat na nagnanakaw dyan sa gobyerno.
The state prohibits political dynasties or dynasties. Ano? Kahit doon sa Ateneo study, makikita natin, thick and fat dynasty, talagang bawal na bawal.
Yung sinabi ni Senator Manny Pacquiao na pwede raw yung pamilya as long as they voted by the people of their provinces. Hindi po. Dahil yan ang sanhi.
For Robredo and de Guzman, it's time to pass a law punishing political turncoats to discourage party switching ahead of the elections.
So habang ina-allow natin yung turncoatism, habang ina-allow natin yung palipat-lipat na partido, hindi natin maaasahan na lalakas yung mga political parties kasi pwede siyang i-dispose at any time.
Despite criticisms of the party-list system, Moreno and Montemayor want it to stay, but with additional safeguards to ensure marginalized sectors are represented. But for Mangundato, the party-list system should be abolished along with a shift to federalism. Cian Arcangel, CNN, Philippines.
Marcos was again a no-show in the second Pilipinas debate organized by the COMELEC. Pobody says it will ask Congress to pass a law requiring all candidates to attend its debates. Straight ahead on News 9, more signs of peace after the Obiena-Patapa conflict. Association President Philip Wico no longer persona non grata. Plus, we tell you all about the BTS grand performance that trended after this break. Welcome back to CNN Philippines. Athletics Track and Field Association President Philip Wico is no longer persona non grata in the eyes of the Philippine Olympic Committee. The status was lifted today along with Patafo's suspension. This comes after the, quote, successful mediation hosted by the Sports Commission between the athletics body and pole vaulter E.J. Obiena, which was completed last week. Now, in the PBA, for the fourth time in 6 years, the Meralco Bolts will face defending champions Barangay Ginebra for the PBA Governors Cup Finals at 6 p.m. Wednesday. This year, Meralco is optimistic that it can finally score a win after losing in each one of its last 3 encounters against Ginebra.
I definitely think that this is definitely the year. Yeah, you could say third time's a charm, fourth time's a charm, but I think the most important takeaway here is persistence. I think everything that we've gone through up until now has prepared us for this moment.
And get ready to hear the roar of a live crowd in UAAP men's basketball games again by tomorrow. The Mall of Asia Arena matches will be open to a limited audience. On Saturday, the Ateneo Blue Eagles earned their 30th straight win at the expense of the De La Salle Green Archers, 74-57. Ateneo is currently the only team with 4 wins and no losses this season. And just in, UAE's Jack Santiago is suspended for 2 games over conduct unbecoming of a head coach. The UAAP commissioner says a thorough review showed Santiago told players to inflict harm on Richie Rivero in last Saturday's game against UP. Now, moving on to entertainment news, music's biggest night saw some massive wins from Filipino-American artists. One of them won all 4 categories his duo was nominated for. CNN's David Daniel has the highlights.
Welcome, everybody, to the 64th Annual Grammy Awards. We made it, people!
Trevor Noah returned as host for an often emotional Grammys. As traditional pop vocal album winner Lady Gaga serenaded her ailing musical partner, Tony Bennett.
I love you, Tony. We miss you.
The show honored behind-the-scenes workers and stage crews who helped get artists back on the road after the lockdown.
Because after 2 years of canceled shows and postponed tours, nobody deserves the spotlight more than the people who actually put up that spotlight.
And John Legend performed with Ukrainian artists after a fervent appeal from Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky.
On our land, we are fighting Russia, which brings horrible silence with its bombs, the dead silence. Feel the silence with your music. Feel it today to tell our story.
Chris Stapleton was among the performers who answered that call. He took home trophies for Best Country Album, Song, and Solo Performance.
And I know we weren't perfect.
Olivia Rodrigo is a 19-year-old triple Grammy winner, collecting Best Pop Solo Performance, Best Pop Vocal Album, and Best New Artist. Silk Sonic went 4 for 4, including Record and Song of the Year for Leave the Door Open.
We call that a clean sweep.
That's more than 4.
But the night's biggest winner was Jon Batiste, who won 5 Grammys, including the night's final prize, Album of the Year, and marveled at the power of music.
It's like a song or an album is made and it almost has a radar to find the person when they need it the most.
In Hollywood, I'm David Daniel.
While Philam singer Olivia Rodrigo's first time BTS performed on the Grammy stage in person, vocalist Jin could not dance alongside other members for the entire song because he is recovering from surgery on his finger. But fans were thankful all 7 members made it on stage, with Jungkook only being released from COVID-19 quarantine last Saturday. BTS also attended as nominees for a category but lost Best Pop Duo or Group Performance to Doja Cat and SZA's Kiss Me More. And that is it for tonight. Join me again on News.ph at 7 p.m. I'm Pia Honteveros for Newsnight, where we go above and beyond the headlines.
This program
Once might be a little funny, but when hiccups won't go away, they can be annoying and sometimes even embarrassing. When you hiccup, there's a sudden spasm in your diaphragm, and this causes your vocal cords to quickly close, leading to the characteristic hic sound. Now, they're usually harmless and can be stopped with simple remedies, but from holding your breath to frightening yourself, what really are the effective ways to get rid of them? On the program today, we'll talk about why hiccups happen, effective ways to prevent and get rid of them, and when they're considered a cause for concern. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and welcome to MedTalk Health Talk on CNN Philippines. For many, hiccups are over quickly. But did you know that the longest bout of hiccups lasted for 68 years? Our guests are here today to tell us why they happen and medical conditions that can be linked to long-term persistent hiccups. With us is Dr. Lenora Fernandez. She's a pulmonologist from Asian Hospital and Medical Center. Also with us is Dr. Jose Miguel Medrano, who is a neurologist from St. Luke's Medical Center. Now, we're all familiar with that striking hic sound of a hiccup. Now, earlier on the show, we mentioned that it's caused by spasm in the diaphragm. Dr. Lenny, tell us more about this. Could you explain to us the whole process of how a hiccup occurs?
So usually we breathe normally and we don't feel it. You're not conscious about it. But when a hic comes or a hiccup comes, the spasm that you mentioned, that would be a sudden inhalation, and then also our vocal cord closes at the same time. So we create that sound. Now that is something abnormal, and there is what we call the abnormal reflex. So usually there would be an abnormal thing that would either go or stimulate the nerves here in the face, in the ears, in the nose, or the lungs, or even the stomach. And that now creates that abnormal spasm of your diaphragm. So literally anything can cause actually a hiccup.
Hiccups can come and go for no apparent reason, but there are some factors that can actually set them off. Dr. Miggs, let's talk about these triggers.
When we talk about hiccups, we just have to identify that there are two major types. You have your very benign, self-limiting hiccups na nawawala lang after a few minutes to maybe an hour at most. These ones can be caused by eating too quickly, ingesting spicy food, or even ingesting a lot of air habang tumatawa po tayo or umiiyak. And sometimes it can also be with a heightened emotional state. Typically, pag very excited or in shock po, you can develop hiccups suddenly or in cases of panic attack.
One common is that eating too much or too quickly as a source of the hiccups. Dr. Lenny, can you explain why this happens? Why a lot of people experience this, pero is it really linked to food per se?
So it's the sudden expansion of our stomach that would now stimulate that nerve. We call it the phrenic nerve, and that is the same nerve that actually would supply our diaphragm. So the diaphragm would spasm, and that now creates the hiccups. So it's the sudden actually distension of the stomach which stimulates it. So carbonated drinks, pag umiinom tayo ng mga soft drinks, medyo na marami, kapag kumain ng sobra, and then alcohol also causes that distension together with the liquid intake. So that now creates the distension and leading now to the hiccups.
And one that might not be so common is what Dr. Miggs mentioned, is the hiccups triggered by emotional factors like stress or excitement. Dr. Miggs, can you talk more about this? How can emotions cause that spasm of the diaphragm?
So yung medical term of hiccups is singultus. So that means na in Latin to catch one's breath while crying. So parang there's always been a historical basis for an emotional state causing hiccups. And the way the brain processes and prevents hiccup is not entirely mapped out yet. But what we know is that yung areas of the brain that control breathing receive information from mga internal sensors within our bodies, the chest, the stomach, and even in our throat and in our brain. And they are controlled through neurotransmitters, which may be dysregulated or changed if you're in a very heightened emotional state, or if you're anxious or under chronic stress.
Now, we all experience hiccups from time to time. Anyone can get them, even infants and children. Now, usually they go away within a few minutes, but there are some that could last for hours, even days, even months for that matter. Dr. Lenny, please explain to us the difference between chronic and persistent hiccups.
We usually have the time cut off, so it would be 48 hours. So if it's less than 48 hours, we can say that that is acute and it can go away by itself. But if it persists beyond 48 hours, then that is when we say it is chronic and you would need help by the doctor, because sometimes we would need medications to really get over the hiccup. But one thing is very important, we have to trace the cause for that. And the one that you mentioned, that it lasted for 68 years, that is intractable hiccup, which now is beyond 1 month. So I myself haven't had a patient that the hiccups lasted for more than a month. My longest is probably 2 weeks.
Now, if your hiccups last longer, as mentioned, or longer than 48 hours, it might be your body's way of telling you about an underlying health issue. Dr. Miggs, what conditions are linked to chronic and persistent or even intractable hiccups?
Intractable hiccups, first of all, are still extremely rare. But when they do occur, most of the time, it's because may problema po in one small part in the brain or brainstem. And that can be caused by very small strokes or tumors. It can be caused by multiple sclerosis, or it can be caused by certain drugs like medications for Parkinsonism. They can also be seen as complications from anesthesia. So sometimes after anesthesia, you'll have prolonged hiccups for maybe 2-3 days after, although that's not very common too. And lastly, if you have diseases of the stomach itself, like if you have very bad or severe gastric reflux or paralysis of your GI tract or stomach, pwede po talaga mag-cause ng intractable hiccups po yun. It's just important for us to note that hiccups are very rare, the sign of a first sign of a disease. So if you do have that for that long, it's the only time you should really consider that it's because of a secondary problem.
Dr. Lenny, when it comes to hiccups, for the most part, a lot of people find it annoying maybe or somewhat, but is there ever a possibility that the breathing can be disrupted because of the severity of the acute hiccup?
Yes, definitely, because it will interfere with your normal breathing, especially if you're having probably more than 10 hiccups in a minute or probably in an hour. That can definitely interfere with that. And then also, they have seen that if you have prolonged hiccups, then it can even mess around with our esophageal sphincter there, the valve there, and it can precipitate even more hyperacidity. So that's the other complication of prolonged hiccups. But definitely for breathing, yes, it can interfere with our normal breathing if it's very frequent.
Chronic hiccups can impact your day-to-day life. It can affect your quality of sleep and your eating habits for that matter, which can lead to exhaustion, dehydration, or even worse. So it's vital to see your doctor right away if you're experiencing them for a prolonged period of time. Now, the cause of hiccups remains a mystery, but there are a number of scientific theories. We'll discuss some of them when we return. You're watching MedTalk Health Talk, your partner in healthcare. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez and welcome back to MedTalk Health Talk, where caring is our calling. Hiccups usually happen suddenly, and even until today, doctors aren't really sure what may cause them. Let's talk about some of the reasons why people may have hiccups and probably some of the concerns of persistent ones. Dr. Lenny, are there any physical characteristics of a person in their airway that may predispose them to be more susceptible to having hiccups?
So some would have anatomic abnormalities really. Anything pressing on the nerve can cause the hiccups. The nerve supplying the diaphragm, for example. There are some with acid reflux. That one is one of the most common causes of hiccups. Again, because there would be stimulation of that nerve that would now cause the spasm of the diaphragm. And then as Dr. Medrano already mentioned, brain problems can also predispose to that. And the others would be, as I mentioned, the loose sphincter there that can be tied up with the reflux. That can also predispose to patients developing hiccups.
Others believe that hiccups begin in utero. They say that it's a training mechanism for babies to learn how to breathe. Dr. Miggs, is there any truth to this? Could you explain this theory to us?
So it's actually a very natural phenomenon, yung fetal hiccups. So sometimes when you do ultrasound, you will see the fetus actually having hiccups, and you may actually feel that in the third trimester for some mothers. Or if these hiccups are very persistent, all you need to do is take a nap or try to relax so that the baby will relax as well. On the opposite hand, if you don't feel these fetal hiccups, it doesn't mean that mahina yung lungs or breathing capacity ng baby. It's just that hindi nyo lang po siya nafe-feel masyado. And even if you do have fetal hiccups, it does not mean that you're at an increased risk of getting hiccups as you grow older.
A known reason for chronic or persistent hiccups is acid reflux. Dr. Lenny, you talked about this a little bit, but let's explain now, how does this trigger the hiccups? Or is this sort of a vicious cycle? Does it happen the other way around?
Yeah, you're right about that, Doc Freddy. It can be a vicious cycle. So first, the acid by itself can stimulate the nerves here, and that would now cause the spasm of the diaphragm. And then if there would be also buildup of acid and also distension of the stomach, again, that will stimulate the nerves that we mentioned and cause the spasm of the diaphragm. And if you're always putting up acid, it's always going up, and then you're having the hiccups as well. They've seen that the esophagus muscles would also have some abnormality eventually, and that now becomes the vicious cycle. More acid, and then more hiccups, more acid, more hiccups.
Now, Dr. Lenny, as a follow-up to that, for our viewers who are not so familiar with acid reflux, anong nararamdaman ng isang taong undergoing acid reflux?
So they can feel the heartburn, as we call it. So maaring masakit po dito. And then very madalas din sa mga pasyente, nagbo-burp sila. So that would also be the acid going up. And sometimes it can mimic even a heart attack, that you can have the chest pain there. And syempre, pumupunta sa mga pulmonologists, yung pangmatagalan na ubo, chronic cough that we see mostly in the afternoon. And then when they lie down by gravity, the acid goes up. That can also be a manifestation of acid reflux. Even it can stimulate even the ear sometimes, and they would still manifest with chronic cough.
Now, Dr. Miggs, earlier on the program, we talked about the pathway of how a hiccup happens, and if there's something interfering with that pathway, whether it be chemical, physical, it could be a tumor, physical tumor, or in the brain. Does this happen often? What I'm asking is, can hiccups be a symptom of an underlying brain condition?
Hiccups are an extremely rare first symptom of any condition. Oftentimes, you'll see hiccups with dizziness or hiccups with weakness or hiccups with some other condition like in multiple sclerosis, they're often accompanied by a loss of balance that's persistent. So as a single symptom by itself, it's not very common. But as a part of a constellation or a group of symptoms, it may be, that's the time you'll see it happen more often. And usually by the time other symptoms are present, the hiccups are the least of your concerns.
Now, there are also a few simple home remedies that might be able to do the trick. More on this when we return. Your health is our mission here on MedTalk Health Talk. We'll be right back. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and this is MedTalk Health Talk, your partner in healthcare. People have very different and interesting ideas on how to cure the hiccups. I'm sure you've heard some people say that you should hold your breath while singing or drink upside down for 90 seconds. Of course, none of these treatments are scientifically proven. They may or may not work. But what are the tried and tested ways to get rid of hiccups? Let's discuss that. Dr. Lenny, what are some of the tried and tested ways scientifically, or maybe that is proven, or addressing some of the physiological parts of the body that can address hiccups?
So there was a Japanese group which did a study on breath holding, and they found that it was quite effective. But the rationale behind is that if when you hold your breath, your carbon dioxide actually increases, but it has to increase to such a level that it can now trigger the what we call the survival instinct for us to breathe. So it now would override the abnormal mechanism of the hiccups, and then your natural breathing now will take over. So that's the rationale behind it. But how long should you hold your breath? So we usually would advise that you hold your breath for 10 seconds, and then do it 3 to 4 times. So that would mean do it in a minute, probably 4 times. And if that will not get rid of the hiccups, then you can probably continue it for 2 to 3 minutes. In that study, they had to hold it a little bit longer to gain a higher carbon dioxide, but 10 seconds will do for us. For some of you who might not be able to hold the 10 seconds of your breath, you can do it holding for 5 seconds, and then you can repeat the process until your hiccups disappear.
Some people even suggest gulping or gargling water to get rid of the hiccups. Dr. Miggs, is this effective, and is there a probable scientific reason why this would be so?
So similar to what Dr. Fernandez said, gulping water or large amounts of water or trying to gargle for long periods of time is just another way of holding your breath for 5 to 10 seconds. They are not really that proven to be as effective in preventing hiccups. But the theory is that it sorts of restores yung regular rhythm ng nerve tsaka ng muscle natin. Parang nare-reset siya. It's just different for each person talaga. There are some people who would respond well to that. But if others, for example, yung cause is really rapid distension of the stomach, even if you keep trying to reset yung diaphragm natin, pero distended pa din yung stomach, you might still get hiccups over and over. So you need to know ano yung reason why you're getting the hiccups first.
Dr. Mig, another common thing that people do is they try to address the reflex of hiccups by doing another reflex, and that particular a gag reflex. They try putting their tongue. Is there any scientific basis for this? Is this effective? This can actually be pretty dangerous at some point.
So that was actually already studied in independent groups in the US and in Italy. There was no evidence that triggering gag actually suppresses the hiccups of any person. They also tried doing Heimlich maneuvers since may spasms diaphragm. And when you do the Heimlich maneuver, you actually try to trigger or stop the myoclonus of the diaphragm from happening. But again, that was not actually proven to be effective.
Dr. Lenny, walk us through a breathing technique that could actually work.
So aside from the breath holding thing, you can augment the diaphragm function by leaning forward while you are exhaling. So with that, doing it slowly so breath holding, and then try to exhale slowly and moving forward so that it will now push your diaphragm up or augment the exhalation. That can help sometimes. So others would also do they would try to lift their knees so that, again, it's to help contract the diaphragm. These are not really proven, but if it may help for you, then at least it's a safe kind of a maneuver.
Just as there's no proven method to stop hiccups, there's no proven way to prevent them as well. But if you experience hiccups frequently, reducing your exposure to known triggers might help. Dr. Miggs, let's go through some of the suggested ways to prevent hiccups.
So there's actually no really good way to prevent hiccups except for preventing what are the common triggers, including overeating or rapid eating, and controlling the way that we breathe when we have high emotional state. So one of the common causes is that when you're laughing too much, you actually swallow a lot of air. It doesn't all go into the airway, parang napupunta din siya sa tiyan. And that might distend the stomach and that might trigger your hiccups after. So if you can control that, you can prevent hiccups that way.
Now, if you're having a short bout of the hiccups, don't stress about those. They're harmless and should resolve on their own. But if it goes on for too long, ask a doctor what you can do. Thank you to pulmonologist Dr. Lenora Fernandez and neurologist Dr. Jose Miguel Medrano for being with us on today's episode. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and thank you for watching MedTalk Health Talk on CNN Philippines. We'll see you again next time.
First on radio, DZKI-IRIGA welcomes CNN Philippines to bring you the latest news you can use, news you can trust. Listen to Newsnight, weekdays, 6 p.m.
We now go above and beyond the headlines,
followed by MedTalk Health Talk.
we'll talk about how to keep ourselves healthy during the pandemic.
Politics as usual.
In this country, not everything really goes according to plan, and politics is, as usual,
Up close and more. Catch CNN Philippines Hour on DZKI-IRIGA. Weekdays, 6 to 7 p.m.
Sa pagpili ng liderato, laging tatandaan, dapat nasa kanya lahat ng katangian na maka-Pilipinas, taong may respeto sa buhay at pamilya, makabuluhan at matinoong pamumuhay. Siya yung makapagtataguyod ng kabutihang panlahat, di mangiiwan, makakasama ang lahat. Malinaw ang pananaw sa makabagong bukas, makatwiran at patas pakisama, at higit sa lahat, maka-Diyos siya dapat. Sa pagpili ng liderato, laging tatandaan, dapat nasa kanya lahat ng katangian, maka-Pilipinas, maka-Pilipinas.
Gabayan ng Pilipinong bumoto ng responsable. Yan naman ang aming
Panatang Maka-Pilipinas.
Iboboto ko, Maka-Pilipinas.
Makabayan sa lupang sinilangan.
Makataot may respeto sa buhay at pamilya.
Siya ay makatwiran at patas makisama.
Masigasig tumulong makaahon ang bawat isa.
Makatarungan, makalingat, maalalahanin sa kapwa.
Makakasama ang lahat, siya'y di mangiiwan. Siya ay makapagtataguyod ng kabutihang panlahat.
Siya ay makabatas.
Siya ay makatotoo.
Siya ay may malinaw na pananaw para sa makabagong bukas.
Higit sa lahat, siya ay maka-Diyos.
Kaya't ayaw niya ng karahasan. Siya ay makakapayapaan.
Iboboto ko ang isang tao na makakalayaan.
Isang leader na makakalikasan.
Isang Pilipinong makabuluhan at matino ang pamumuhay.
Sa isip,
sa salita, at sa gawa. Gabayan ang Pilipinong bumoto